Hey everybody, this is Trevor at Perfect Circuit. I'm here with Travarsi, and the sounds are coming from her Eurorack and Digitac Digitone setup. We're going to go over a bunch of ways to connect Eurorack hardware and using Midi and CV and DIN sync and all of that. So,
hello, this is Travarsi here. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. And the music is coming through a little bit. Just kind of give a kick there a little bit. So let's see, just before we get started here, whoops. I'm basically going to show you first, just play a little bit of the patch that I created. And then I'm just going to kind of break it down and show you and talk to you about how I've connected, for example, the VCMC, which I have over here, and this Univert Inter, which is noise engineering's module that should be coming out. And yeah, just talk about some of the connections and answer any questions. But basically, I'm going to show you some of the ways that I use these modules in my live setup. So let's see. So if you look over, you can see my sequencer is still moving. And what I'm going to do is show you how I can actually connect the sequencer to my hardware. So just before we get started, though, we should go over just a couple terms in case some people are new to using clock. And let's talk about PPQN, which I'll refer to that, which is pulses per quarter note. And that's basically saying that there's 24 pulses or clock ticks per quarter note. And that's what I'm going to use here with the Metron, which is the WMD sequencer. We'll talk about MIDI and DIN. And one of the things is people are like, oh, they look the same. And if you look at the DIN connection, I'm going to pull this little connector out here. And I'm not sure if you can see that or if we can maybe even pull one up. But if you look at the smile, I guess, or the way the 5 pins, and turn it upside down, the difference between the MIDI first of all, MIDI sends clock, stop, start, MIDI notes, and other types of data, like continuous control, which otherwise referred to as CC messaging, through MIDI. Whereas DIN, it just uses the 2 pins, right, the 2 bottom pins here, and one sends clock and one sends the start-stop message. And DIN is typically 24 PPQN or 48 PPQN. So tonight I'm going to be using the 24 PPQN. So if you look over here at my WMD sequencer, I'm just gonna stop it here. Well, first of all, it's running internally. So if I go to global and turn this knob here, so it goes to internal, actually external, excuse me. And you look, this is where on this global setting where you can change your 24, changes your pulses per quarter note. So I can flip through here, and this module happens to take 8, 12, 4. Every sequencer is different. So one of the things that I wanted to do, even though, so first of all, let me back up. This sequencer does not send out MIDI. It does not have MIDI in or out. So the only way that I can sync this sequencer is by using either a clock like Pamela's workout, which is what currently I have it connected to right now, which is sending clock and a reset, or using something like this, which is a DIN connector. And basically this is just breaking out those two pins. This side with the red tape here, it's basically letting you know that's where the reset, and this is where it's sending the clock. So it's splitting those two pins out. And I'm going to plug that here into the MIDI through. And one of the things that when you think about how you want to connect your hardware and connecting it to your modular, not every hardware sends DIN. For example, Electron, the way they set it up, if you go to your settings and you look at your MIDI configurations, you'll notice that it has like, you have a MIDI in, MIDI out, and MIDI through here. Not sure, should I zoom in on that, Trevor, or you think you guys can see it okay?
We can switch to the other camera.
Okay. So let me just kind of go over here just for a second. So if you go to settings here and where it says MIDI config and you go to port configuration, you'll see here where it has like your port MIDI out port, your through, and your input. On the through port, you can set it to MIDI, which will send from whatever's coming in, will send through the through, or you can change it to DIN 24, which is meaning that's 24 pulses per quarter note, PPQN, or 48. So in this case, because I am using my WMD Metron sequencer and it takes 24 pulses per quarter note, I'm going to make sure that this clock setting is going to match that pulse per quarter note. So I'm not sure if you can see that on there. I think what we're going to do is throw up a link for you all, just because just to search to see like a link showing what other types of hardware that actually can send DIN, because not all pieces of hardware can send DIN. It's
yeah. Sorry, which link? Let me pull this up really quickly.
Or we'll just drop it in the comments as we move through it, because I'm not sure. Do we have any questions?
Then there's one other question as well, which was why you're using DIN instead of 1/8" MIDI for the clocking.
DIN tends to be a little bit more stable because when you think of MIDI, it's one path, and it's the data line. Let's see, how do I explain this? So
it's serial data.
Thank you. Yes. So the more data you're pushing through, it tends to cause jitter or a delay because of the fact that it is serial data. Whereas DIN, it's just sending that pulse per quarter note and the reset, start, stop. That's it. So it just seems to be a more solid, a little bit more reliable. That's what I found. The adapter that I have here, it's about $11. And if you can send DIN out from your device, I feel like, in my experience, that seems to be a little bit more rock solid in terms of clocking. So let's see. So I'm going to actually take the clock out of my Pamela's workout and plug it in here. Let's see. So.
And I just wanted to, while you're doing that, really quick, point out the ERM MIDI Clock Plus, which if you do want to use MIDI Clock and not use DIN, if you don't have like a DIN device or something like that, this should produce a much more solid MIDI clock that you can clock all of your other devices with.
Great. So let's see. So if I hit play right now on my Digitac, here, hang on, let me get out of the global so you can see. You'll see that it's now sequencing my Metron. So when it's sending the clock. So when I stop it, it stops. play. If I only hit the stop once, it's not resetting, but it resets as well. If I hit double tap on there and play, which is pretty solid clock. So that's the first part, is just to kind of get those two locking together. If you do use a TRS cable, I think somebody did ask about that, the breakout cable, like a MIDI to, there are two types, so just keep that in mind. There's a type A and type B for wiring. We do have a link, we can drop that for you as well, and basically you can search your device to see which pin pin setting, I guess, type A or type B, that your module or your Korg, I think, also has this out, right? Like the MIDI out, aside from Synch, you can break it out from there as well, right, Trevor? Or just to kind of confirm that?
And I brought up that website as well that has the list of which type of connector which devices use. I'll share the link in the chat as well.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's see here. So now as we talk about the DIN sync, and we went over the setup and locking the clock, the next thing I want to kind of go over is the going into the VCMC. So one of the ways that I like to use this module here is a CV to Midi converter. Not to be confused with the other way around, MIDI to CV. This is CV to MIDI. And one thing that's cool about this module is that, for example, if you take your hardware device and look in the manual, and you'll find that's where you can find some of your CC messaging you should tend to have a chart. Like I know, for example, the Digitech, the Digitone, at the end of the manual, you'll have a chart and it'll show you some of the control messages that your device will allow you to control via MIDI. And one thing that I like to use is if I use I'm putting this in the case so you can see it a little bit better. But when I'm playing live and I have it in a big case, it's nice to be able to control multiple parameters of my hardware. Because some of you may ask, like, why don't I just go to the Digitech? And if I push play here, hopefully it's not too loud. Is that too loud? Are you okay? Okay. Maybe I want to modulate and play with, first of all, modulate other parameters simultaneously while I'm maybe doing a solo with something else or playing with the kick. So one of the ways to use the VCMC is you can probably hear the way this bass is modulating. If I go to the page here, not sure if you can see that.
Hold on 1 second.
Oh, hang on. So
okay, sorry, I was just fixing an audio problem.
Oh, okay. Am I okay? Or?
I think we're good now.
Okay, okay. So now I want to switch to this camera over here, this one here. Hang on. And if you look right over here, my apologies for the moving camera, you can see that I have it set up. So now instead of me having to turn the knob of the frequency cut off there, I can now have the VCMC modulate it for me. And how I'm setting that up is if I go over to the VCMC here, this parameter, I'm going to stop it for a second. I have the CV mapped out. So each of these lanes, you have an option. So for the sake of being less confusing, I'm going to use MIDI channel 7 for number 7. So each one has its own lane. I'm going to go to number 7. And by me selecting that, not sure if you can kind of see that a little bit better. You can see that I can change the configuration of the CV, a fader, which is this. This is the gate, the CV, and the gate and the button are connected. So if you map to the button to latch or to as a momentary, it's the same as using the trigger. So if I go to the CV here and select it, you'll see here, if you'll kind of notice, if I can zoom in a little bit better, you'll see the CC message number 74. And how I know that's 74 is by going back to the manual, as I mentioned earlier, and just looking at what control messages I can, which control messages, excuse me, I can use to change the parameters in the Digitag via this MIDI device. So one of the ways that I like to do that is I'm using this Batumi LFO to do the modulation for me instead of me having to turn the knob. Let's see. So if I go back, and one other thing to note is to just be mindful of the channel of MIDI that you're sending the message on. The channel that you're sending the MIDI message on through the VCMC must match the MIDI channel that you are trying to send the message to on the channel for the Digitag. For example, I set this to channel 7. So on this track, and I'm going to switch back to, so you can kind of see the overview. I'm using track 7 here. And in the settings, I changed the track 7 to make sure that the MIDI is routed to, that channel is routed to channel 7. So if I go to track 7, and you can choose whatever MIDI channel you have. You have 16 channels to choose from, but just make sure that they're on the same channel so they can have that digital conversation with each other. Cool. So another parameter that I have it set to is to the, let's see here, to the mute. Let's see. So if I and I have this fader set to the decay, to the attack on the, to the envelope on the decay time. On channel 8, I opted to set this to the volume. And I mapped the CV out of the volume to the delay. So any way to kind of make the live experience fun and being able to try to use other parameters besides my hand to do the modulation for me. So that way I can have more fun. So does anybody have any questions so far? And is the level good now? Can everybody hear? Just want to take a moment to kind of pause and make sure before we kind of move on to some of the other settings. All right, so the next thing is I'm going to talk about this module right here, which I'm going to just slide my camera over here. Just give me a moment. Switch it. Cool. And this is the Univer Enter. And this is the noise engineering's module. It will be out this year. And I've had an opportunity to have spent some time with it, and I love it. It is a MIDI to CV converter. opposite of the Bafaco VCMC, which is the CV to Midi converter. Both of these modules can be connected not only to hardware, but they can be connected to your DAW. They are MIDI interfaces, and I think that's a topic that we'll cover in a different live stream, right, Trevor? Yeah, like we could do a whole live stream basically on DAW and MIDI and CV connection.
Yeah, I think at some point later, that's something definitely that we will talk
about. And then it's also covering CV tools, probably with Ableton Live, and being able to control your modular directly with your audio interface and CE.
Yes, yes. So, but right now, the way I'm using it is I am sending MIDI from my Digitone into the UI, is how I'm going to refer to it. It does come with a web app, and you can change the parameters 1 through 8 to whether you want them to pitch, gate, clock, velocity. You have a large menu of options to choose from. It's very user friendly, and you do it on Google Chrome, and it's great. So far, my experience with it has been, it's been awesome. But so how I'm using it right now is I put it in the pitch and gate to 1 and 2. And again, I took the manual from my Digitone this time, and I looked up the CC messaging, and I opted to change out 3, 4, and 5 to, well, first of all, let me back up. I did not have to actually, not to confuse you, sorry, my apologies. I did not actually have to look at the manual for the Digitone, because I needed to basically make a decision on which CC messages that I wanted to use to set these parameters. I chose 70, 71, and 72. And what I did then was go over to my Digitone, and if I'm just going to switch over, if some of you are familiar with the Digitone, you have the option when you have your MIDI track here, you can choose what channel that you want to. Let me switch it over. One moment. There we go. You have an option to choose what channel you want to send the MIDI to, which you can choose that channel when you are setting up the parameters on your UI on the module. And if you go to the next menu here, you're able to choose where you want to send the control message. So in this case, this is where I chose 70, 71, 72. I could have kept going. I had 3 other outputs on the module, 73, and so forth. But then going to this menu is where you activate these knobs by pushing and using function and pushing this. And now I am able to send this value to the module that I have it patched to. So if I go back to to my other camera, just one moment here. And let me just kind of push play here and mute these for a second. And I unmute my MIDI channel. You hear in my module, I have this patched to my Crucible. And by me turning these, I'm able to change the parameters on my module without having to touch that. Now I could go in and use an LFO on the Digitone and use the LFO to maybe modulate this for me, so then I don't have to stand here and turn the knob. But Again, this is just one way, one of many ways on how you can use this module. Does anybody have any questions about the UI or any other questions about the setup?
There weren't any. There's a few other questions that we could talk about as well after, but I guess first, if anyone has questions about the new noise engineering module, what is it called again?
The Univer-Inter. But yeah, we can go to the other question, questions.
Cool. So Stu asked, can we talk a bit about sysx files and what they do when you need them, etc.? Yeah. Okay. So basically, sysx is kind of like Midi CC, but not as fast. So you can send control changes and things like that to a synth that doesn't have Midi CC. It's usually like older, like 80s synths. Like for example, my CZ101, you can only really control it with sysx. So you can change settings like in between patches with sysx. But if you're trying to do something like modulate a filter or change a setting in real time, sequenced, it's probably not going to work very well. Yeah, that's what I know about sysx. You can. It's more of a thing where you're going to have a librarian and send a bunch of sysx at once to that synthesizer.
Right. Yeah, and I guess it's another way too to save files. Like for example, on the web app of the UI, you can set your parameters and then download. You can save it and download that file, and then later on upload it back to the UI. Generally, anytime you can save a file, especially when you're playing live, I've learned, like, I recommend like having a folder and just saving all those files. So in that moment when you're setting up to play live and maybe something doesn't transmit over, you always have that file as a backup that you can quickly just upload to whatever device or that you're using, not just a UI, but any other device that sends sysx files. Any other questions, or do we have any other questions, Trevor?
Yes, there was another question about tricks. There was another question about tricks for resetting the sequencer on a DFAM or Renee or something like that that doesn't have a reset input.
You can use the PAMs to re-trigger.
Yeah, so that's so your two options, right, are to either use an external sequencer so that you don't need to reset its. Well, I mean, if you're talking about the DFAM, you could use, instead of using the built-in DFAM sequencer, just use a different sequencer. The other option is, since trigger and advance are separate on the DFAM, you could, if you're careful with your calculations, you could advance the sequencer. Basically, say you want a 5-step sequence, you could have 5 advances and 5 triggers, and then
reset, right?
Well, no, then you would have no trigger for a second, and then 3 more advanced triggers to go back to 1.
That's right.
I believe that works with the DFAM. I don't have a DFAM in front of me right now, but off the top of my head, I think that's the way you do it.
I think I see a question about what's a good solution if you want to integrate an iPad. Did I see that right? Either one of these modules you can use to integrate with an iPad. You just need one of those camera adapters. I'd recommend getting one that also has the additional input to charge, whether it be your iPhone or your iPad, just because it will drain the battery in general, just running apps like that. But both of these are interfaces where if you USB class compliant, so you can connect them and use your iPad with apps on there. Let's see, one app that I like is that AUM app. That's a good app. Trevor, do you use that one as well, right? Or you know, what I'm talking about?
AUM is a mixer.
Tide is cool for effects, like dropping a reverb on there and kind of running your modular through that. That's pretty fun.
And there's the Moog Model 15 app, which costs like $30 instead of $10,000, which is how much a real Moog Model 15 costs.
Right.
And then if you've got the Midi CV, you could even use your sequencers, your CV sequencers inside of your Eurorack setup to control it.
Yes. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you may be able to still get it for a good price right now, because I
know Model D is free right now. So yeah, if you're, or it was a little while ago.
But yeah, there's a lot of great apps out there. But either one of these modules, for sure. Let's see. Is there any other questions out there? Let me see. You guys still have an echo? I did see that somebody wrote that there is like a little bit of an echo.
Yeah, sorry about the echo. I'm trying to turn your mic down when I'm talking so we don't get it. Yeah, any other questions?
Let's see. I mean, let's see. Oh, can you use CV tools to sequence from Ableton to Modular?
Yeah.
Yes.
For sure. That when we were talking about earlier about maybe doing another video where we go into like syncing DAWs and MIDI control back and forth between a Eurorack and DAW setup, I think then we would talk about CV tools, which is an awesome thing. We don't really have the setup here right now to show that, but you could definitely sequence your Eurorack with that.
Yes. As long as, like, along with having like a DC coupled interface will assist with that. Something like the ES8 or the ES9 or the Mo2, I think, is another DC coupled interface.
Yeah, the ES8s and the Mo2s, and Universal Audio ones as well. I'm sure there's more, but those are the ones I know off the top of my head.
Joe asks, is there a full layout of the cases here?
Do you want to just go over which modules you're using really quickly?
So starting right here, I have the Pamela's workout, and actually it has this additional breakout which will send DIN out or MIDI out. So that's pretty handy. It's another way to, if I wanted to use the PAMs to clock the Digitact or the Digatone instead, I could use the DIN out or the MIDI out, since these devices take both, excuse me, these devices take MIDI, they do not take DIN. So for example, if you're using like an older drum machine and you would need the DIN out. The next one I have over here to the next to it is the Jomox Kick, which I love this one. You can make your own presets quickly, so you can change up your your kick pretty seamlessly, which is pretty nice. I am using the WMD Performance Mixer LE, and it has I have the new black face with the additional 2 extra channels. So there's a total of 10 channels. It's great for performance. And for my sequencer, as I mentioned earlier, I'm using the WMD Metron. I do have another sequencer in my case, which I love this thing. It's the Mimetic Digitalis. It's a CV sequencer. So one of the ways to create modulation, for example, if I have the BIA. So on this sequencer, it's basically stepping through and sending control voltage from one of the channels on the Mimetic Digitalis to the attack. I just like that to kind of give a little movement. The rest of the case I have in here is which I don't have patched up right now, but I do have, well, I was using the Crucible, which is also a WMD module, which is and I think that's it. Well, I have the Batumi LFO right here, which I'm using that to modulate. To modulate the parameter on the Digitac, as I mentioned earlier. And then I have the Digitac and the Digitone.
Cool. Any other questions? And I think they also want to hear you play the setup a little bit.
Oh, okay, let's, sure. Let me, why not? Awesome. Does anybody have any other questions before we kind of sign off? And I do want to thank everybody for tuning in and chatting and listening in. We do have another interview with Alex, aka Nasty Nachos from WMD on Thursday. We are doing some pop-up live stream on IG on Friday afternoons, just having various artists play with different pieces of gear every week. If any of you are out there, and this Friday, we are looking to have artists to be chosen to play a 5-minute jam on the Instagram live stream with your modular. If you would like to be chosen for that, post something on your IG page and tag Perfect Circuit so we can select you, because I'd love to have you jam on that. And I just want to say thank you for watching to everyone, and thank you, Trevor, for helping me moderate this. And yes, like thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. We're gonna be streaming a bunch, so subscribe to our YouTube and you'll get a notification every time we do a stream.
Good night.
Bye.